monopolize government?
The Founding Fathers were very concerned about the use of political power to benefit special interest groups, what they call factions. Small segments of society that had their own selfish concerns that didn't relate to the benefit of others. So they wanted as much as possible to restrain the ability of the general government to engage in that kind of behavior.
The system that we have today of interventionism serves the interests of the lobbyists, and they represent the international corporations because they have influence. And they say what we need is lobbying reform to keep the lobbyists from lobbying. That is not the answer, because lobbying is just petitioning the government. We have a right to do that. What we have to do, there's two answers to that. One, if you had the right people in Washington, the right members of Congress who would not yield to the temptation of being influenced by money, the whole program would cease. They wouldn't have any more influence. But that doesn't seem to happen. The real solution is getting the government out of the business of being able to pass out favors, so there's no incentive for the businessman to come and lobby the member of Congress.
Have we allowed corporate power to influence the creation of laws that fail to benefit the people? Are we allowing corporations to reconfigure the laws of this nation to suit their purposes at the expense of real people?
Do you feel special interests have hijacked Congress?
I don't. No, I think they've got a valuable part to play because they are experts in their area, and they can provide some good guidance for the congressmen who aren't specialists in these areas.
Lawyers will argue that indeed corporations are people. They will argue that they are even good corporate citizens. But is a corporation really a citizen? Or for that matter, even a person? And what about a multinational corporation? Is that even a citizen of the United States?
There's no doubt in my mind that the political apparatus of the United States government is much more beholden to the powerful lobbying interests, the companies that can write those big fat checks, campaign contributions and that sort of thing. You can see it every day. The politicians will give speeches, very good speeches in some cases, saying all the things that the voters want to hear. But then when it comes time to vote on an issue, they quite often will go directly opposite to what they said, and they will vote in favor of the positions that the corporations want and the lobbyists want.
Did the Founding Fathers write the Constitution for real flesh and blood people or for corporations, artificial entities that are creations of the state? If one suspects the Constitution was written with real people in mind, then is it fair to those real people that artificial people get to write and influence the passage of all manner of laws, and expect these laws to be binding upon those same real flesh and blood people?
Public officials have become less concerned with what people want or with what the common American thinks. What's the solution? Well, what kind of a government is this? It's self-government. Right? Self-government is not a spectator sport. If people don't participate in it, either running for office themselves or becoming involved with political campaigns or becoming involved with public education on issues, well, then you're going to leave by default control in the hands of the small number of people who do those things. And the smaller that group becomes, and the more they see that the general population is really disinterested or even impotent in political affairs, the more they will tend to think, well, we can run things our own way. We don't have to remain in touch with the people because they don't count.
Just as Marxism called for workers of the world to unite, a different totalitarian ideology calls for corporations of the world to unite. Not only unite with each other, consolidation, but unite with governments, with states. Thus, when corporations unite with the state, it is known as fascism. Fascism develops when the state initiates the merger of corporate power with state power, as what happened in Nazi Germany and Mussolini's Italy. The key words being merge and power. Fascism is thus not a merger of the state and corporations per se. It's a merger of their power. Secondly, it's the merged power that governs, not either the state or the corporations per se. Today, however, with multinational corporations growing into entities, some larger than states, we have emerging a totally unprecedented form of fascism, what could be called corporate fascism.
Have you ever heard of corporate fascism? If so, what is it?
I'm not familiar with that term specifically. I could take a guess at it, where I assume that it reflects on the amount of money that's available for large corporations to support lobbying and have an influence on what laws are passed and not passed.
Under corporate fascism, corporations are so huge that they have the financial ability to initiate powerful lobbying influences over governments, even the Congress and presidency of the United States. Thus, even though such multinationals and the U.S. states are able to remain distinct, again, it's their merged power that increasingly supersedes the will of we the people.
Have you ever heard of corporate fascism? If so, what is it?
I've read about it on CNN. I don't know if I can actually define it. If I had to say, corporate fascism is probably just greed, corporate greed, and just hypocrisy.
One of the earliest examples of corporate fascism can be found in the current U.S. banking system. This system, known as the Federal Reserve System, or Fed, is a quasi-private, government-sanctioned banking cartel, little different from OPEC or any other cartel. Just as OPEC dictates the amount and price of oil, the Federal Reserve dictates the amount and price of money.
Federal Reserve, in its very nature, is contrary to a free market. The Federal Reserve is not only regulating, but it's manipulating the marketplace against the will of the people who are conducting the marketplace.
By setting interest rates and determining the amount of money in circulation, this cartel presents the illusion of working for the general welfare, but in reality, it always acts in the best interests of not only itself, but its prime lenders and borrowers, the U.S. government, the major New York banks, and the multinational corporations. With this unlimited balance sheet, the Fed can effectively create as much money as it wants to satisfy Congress's wayward spending habits. This money, known as legal tender, is money not backed by gold, but created by mere government fiat, and now mandated as payment for all debts, public and private. Known as fiat currency, this so-called money is regulated not by the free market, but by a Federal Reserve Open Market Committee that deliberates in secrecy. It is the Federal Reserve System that is at the heart of endless bailouts and the too-big-to-fail syndrome, a system that creates endless amounts of money that fuels wars and the fascist globalist agenda by basically two mechanisms: monetizing debt and fractional reserve. Today, the U.S. currency is backed by nothing but debt in the form of U.S. bonds. This is known as monetizing debt, the act of converting debt into money. Debt causes inflation because the Federal Reserve System facilitates the conversion of government bonds, government IOUs, into Federal Reserve notes, what we use as a currency. When this is done, the money supply is inflated. When the money supply is inflated, it becomes watered down or diluted. Just like stock, when a corporation authorizes and issues more stock, existing shareholders are diluted. When money is diluted, it has less purchasing power. When it has less purchasing power, prices rise because it takes more Federal Reserve notes to purchase a given product. When prices rise, it has the effect of a tax. Inflation is therefore a hidden tax.
If you can delay the payment and hide the payment, that is, borrow money or print money, those who really pay the price are hard to find. They're usually the poor people and the middle class. So it's a very specific plan to have a central bank to destroy money. It's been done for thousands of years. They used to dilute the metals or clip the coins, or even in the old days they tried printing money. Today we do it with a computer.
Thus, corporate fascism uses debt, which generates the hidden tax of inflation, to fund its operations and expansion.
As far as fractional reserve banking is concerned, that's a problem of fraud. That is, fractional reserve banking is where the bank generates more paper currency than it has, say, gold and silver reserves on a specie standard. And it can really generate as much paper currency as the market is willing to bear, as long as the market has some credence that the bank will pay. And what tends to happen is that the banks overexpand. They play too many of those cards. And at a certain stage, the market says, no, there's too much money out here in terms of real resources. And you get what's called a bank run. People come back to the banks and will make good on these promises. The banks can't do it. You have recession, depression, what have you, the whole credit structure drops. Now, if that kind of a system were fully disclosed and everyone knew how it was working, my anticipation is that there would be very few fractional reserve banks.
The framers of the Constitution were quite aware of the liabilities of bills of credit and fractional reserve banking. And this is why Article 1 states, no state shall make anything but gold and silver a tender in the payment of debts. And, quote,